Okay, so we're gonna, start off pretty simple. Why don't you kind of tell us about yourself, who you are, and we'll start from there.
Yeah, sure. My name is Sean, 45 years old, and I have a wife and two kids. Moved out to Colorado uh, about 7 years ago. Pretty active person for the most part. I was pretty active in the running world, triathlon, climbing, and just loved hiking, getting out and seeing the world. My wife is very similar upbringing as me. We both consider ourselves pretty adventurous. I'm a software engineer by trade. I been doing that most of my life at this point, and really like technology and tinkering with things, getting my hands dirty, and learning all the time. I've always thought that I was in my best when I was being challenged mentally and then keeping myself on my toes.
Next up, why don't you tell us the story of your diagnosis?
Wow, it's like one of those that I'm not even sure where to begin with this. I will I will say that it came as a complete shock to me. I experienced symptoms for in upwards of a year and a half that I thought were related to things like indigestion, just mild things that didn't really amount to anything that I thought was severe enough to justify going to a doctor or anything. And there were just a few things that kind of started to stack on top of things. And I I'd gotten different and I also want to apologize that one of my symptoms that I experience is anemia. So if I ever pause for extended periods of time while I think about my thoughts, it's unintentional. It's try to get my brain cut up and articulate what I'm thinking. But what I was trying to say is there were moments with the doctors where they told me that it could be cancer, and I vividly remember thinking, yeah, whatever, I'm not going to listen to this. It's fine. It's going to be like a stomach ulcer or something, and I'm going to get some medicine. They're going to send me on my way. So when I got the phone call early in the morning of July 3rd, 2025, I didn't know what to say. I kind of just paused for a moment. I had my laptop sitting on my lap, and I messaged my wife on a chat and just said, "Hey, I'm going to need you to call me in a moment." And I didn't really have much of a reaction, to be perfectly honest with you, with the doctor. I just said, "Well, I guess I'm going to have to do what I have to do," and then it kind of slowly started to hit me from there. Like this isn't just a random thing that I can do on my own. I think this is serious, and immediately started thinking about my family and um, do my best not to get emotional here. And I mentioned I had two young kids, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to imagine a life where they grew up without their father. And it was hard. It was really hard. So it was challenging. It was actually really, really challenging. It was some of the most difficult moments of my life. And I probably experienced every emotion that I could possibly experience, even anger. Anger at myself, anger at the world around me and people. And then ultimately I kind of came into this period of acceptance and that I thought that this was the end. I had to come to grips with the fact that I didn't have any say in this anymore. Um, that was hard, but I thought back to things like pets um, how they just naturally they know they're sick and they're tired and they don't fight it. They just come to this peace with themselves, and I kind of eventually got to that point. I will say that I've since met with the oncologist, and I don't think this is a death sentence, but just the magnitude of everything really starts to add up at times, and it's so yeah, that's it's hard to pinpoint like any particular thought or whatever that I would say my reaction to it was, because it was so everywhere. And yeah, full blown, like I can achieve anything, to wow, like just pure feelings of defeat and like not knowing that I could do anything. So yeah, it was all over the place.
Okay. And what about like the endoscopies? Like, I know there's a lot to do with that.
Yeah. Those, it's funny that I laugh now at that whole thing leading up to it. I started out this whole procedure thinking that I had some kind of issue with my heart, and I got diagnosed with I'm blanking the term, but there was they actually saw an irregularity in my heartbeat and thought that there was left ventricle. I think it's pronounced hypertrophy, or hypertrophy is spelled. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but that was the initial diagnosis, and so I went through different. Went to see cardiologists and went through different tests, passed the stress test with flying colors, and came to this whole this to the end of all that, and we were like, well, what's wrong here? You have these symptoms, but the doctors didn't know how to explain it at this point. And I was experiencing a tremendous amount of anxiety, and they were suggesting to me that maybe I was creating my own stress, that I was having anxiety attacks. And I had to like pause for a moment and think about that and say, no, I don't think that's what this is. I think that I would agree that I'm anxious. I have anxiety, but I think there's something else at play here. I don't know what it is, and I can't explain it. And that, I guess, that confidence that I had in myself and my body, and I really became in tune with myself over the years, especially when I was pushing myself, and I knew that something just wasn't right with me. So the doctors went back and did some blood work, and they found that I was severely anemic. So all the red flags were now starting to show up, and I finally had an answer for, okay, I'm anemic. I can understand now why I'm feeling anxious, why I'm so low on energy, why I get this burning sensation in and tingling in my extremities. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of thought that was it, that I was just low on iron and I needed to maybe make some supplementary changes to my diet, and I'd be on my way. And that was when they started to mention things like that it could be cancerous. And like I mentioned before, was immediately kind of dismissing of that. And so they went through the general family history. I had a father that passed away a few years ago. He died of colon cancer, and that immediately set off red flags for the medical front. And so I got the initial one scheduled, and I was scared just like any other male going through this process for the first time, and the humility of it, and thinking about what you have to go through. And ultimately, when it was all said and done, it was fine. It was really not that big of a deal. The prep is certainly is messy. Okay, so yeah, we were talking about the fear of going through something you'd never gone through before, and those thoughts were very real, and I was intimidated just like anybody else was. And I remember going through I read all the horror stories that other people had gone through, and kind of worked myself up a little bit. But when it was all said and done, it wasn't that big of a deal for me. I was up for part of the night, and then got up early for work the next day, and went to my procedure, and everything really, for all intents and purposes, was pretty seamless. So I think it's important to mention that I had two different. I had both a lower endoscopy and an upper endoscopy that day, and when the results came back for this first time around, everything was fine. There were no issues found in the colon. My stomach looked fine, and I wasn't really all that surprised, to be honest with you. That part of it, I didn't think I had any major issues at this point, and I had no reason to. And but there were still unanswered questions about why I was anemic, and we still had to figure that out. So the doctors recommended the next course of action would be to start with this capsule camera, which is about like this long and maybe about the width of my finger, or diameter of my finger, and it's designed to get detailed images of your intestines, and it does a really good job at that. So I went back through the same procedure. That's the cleansing process. I showed up. I swallowed the pill. It was incredibly intimidating, this massive pill, but surprisingly, it was an effortless. I hit my ring on the table there. It was effortless, and I basically had that. I'm trying to remember how long it actually took for it to pass, but it took like 40 some thousand images or something like that. And when the results came back, everything was like pointing to that there was some kind of blood in my stomach. So I was starting to kind of get the little baby steps along this whole process. The capsule camera is really good at taking images of your intestine, but it's not particularly good at imaging your stomach. So even though they knew that they saw blood in my stomach, they didn't know where it was coming from at this point. So they continued along the path. They saw digested blood in my intestines, and came back and said, okay, we have to schedule you for another upper endoscopy. Between that visit and the second visit for the upper endoscopy, I had a CAT scan, and what they found was actually unremarkable. They didn't see anything that looked concerning at all. So, I'm trying to create this pattern that existed in my mind at the time, that really, like, everything was fine. That I didn't know what the ultimate diagnosis would be, and I think that's really important that people know that, because even though I had a lot of unanswered questions and doctors telling me it could be cancerous, I felt so normal, other than the being anemic and all that it didn't really occur to me that they could be right. I thought I'm a young, healthy individual. I've been active my whole life, and it just didn't make sense to me. So when they brought me back in for my second upper endoscopy, I at this point was pretty much a pro with the cleansing process. I knew what to expect there. Nothing was that all the fears were kind of gone there. The fear of like going under for anesthesia was no longer there, and I guess at this point, even coming out of anesthesia, I was starting to get more relaxed and joking with the doctors and my wife, and really, again, like, just let's find this problem. It's going to be simple. I'll be on my way. And I think that was when I saw the reaction from the doctor after I was trying to joke with him and just how stern he was. I kind of started to get this impression that things might be more serious than I was giving it credit for. And he asked me I'm sorry, he suggested rather that I get a CAT scan. He didn't know that I just had one 2 weeks earlier, and my wife responded saying, "Oh, he had one, came back, everything is fine." So he kind of, he finally relaxed his posture a little bit and said, well, it's probably a bacterial infection. We'll get you some antibiotics, and that's really what I thought was where we were going to end up. That it was just going to be a quick and easy trip to the pharmacy. I'd get some medication, and I'd be back to normal in no time. So when he called me the very next morning, it was around 8:30 in the morning, and I just want to again just say how shocked I was, because that was the first time that I started to really piece together the different times the doctors had called out the C word, and I had dismissed it and thought that happens to other people, when they're in their 70s and 80s. Not me. I'm a healthy young person. It can't be me.
So would you say then that listening to your body and pushing back is important?
Yes, and and I just want to say that I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was something that I'm not good at. I really genuinely don't push back often in life, and this was the one time that I am really thankful that I did. I'm incredibly thankful, because it doesn't come naturally for me. I take the advice of people that are smarter than me, and the doctors certainly are. I put them amongst some of the smartest people on the planet, and but I knew that something was wrong, and it wasn't easy for me to push back. It took some effort on my part. So, and I think it's really important that other people know that, because I know there are other people like me out there that don't like to push back, but just I want them to know that they're worth it, and listen to themselves.
So then this question is, how has it affected your work life?
So that's a difficult question for me, and it goes a lot of different directions. So I'm going to start before the diagnosis, because I think that's a really important part of my story, that I want others that experience these that it goes through a similar experience again to really again trust yourself, and trust your instincts, and stand up for yourself, because I didn't do that, and the very first time I reached out to my employer was about July of last year. So that would have been a year out from the diagnosis. And I went to my then director and told him that I was experiencing some, basically I felt like I was going through a mental health crisis. I was experiencing anxiety, and I couldn't explain why I had this anxiety. It was uncontrollable at times. It was some of the worst anxiety I'd ever had in my life. I now know that was related to the anemia. At the time, I thought it could have been related to a number of factors that were going on in my life at that point. And I was finding myself slip, and I couldn't articulate my thoughts clearly, and it was awkward for me to have conversations in front of people, especially. So I defaulted to wanting to use computer forms of communication, where I could type something out, I could make corrections and fill in the gaps, because I was finding that if I was ever recording myself, I was leaving out words unknowingly and stumbling my way through responses, and that in turn was creating a lot of turmoil for me, and my work was starting to lash out at me, and I just want to remind everybody, this was completely undiagnosed at this point. I had no clue what was wrong. I didn't know that I was suffering from anemia, And all I knew was the world around me was changing, and I was scared, and I didn't have an answer for it. And I think that I was hoping to find support in the people I worked with, and I wasn't getting that. And I think part of the reason is I wasn't enough of an advocate for myself. I don't. It was really hard for me to, without some kind of thing to point to acknowledge that there could be a medical condition that would be explaining everything that I was experiencing. I even went through. I met a therapist. I explained to her everything that I was experiencing. And coincidentally, she was actually one of the first people to recommend that I go through a complete. Why am I blanking on the word here? Physical. And I actually dismissed her early on, initially anyway. I did eventually come back. Because what she saw in me was an individual that I had been successful, and then all of a sudden started to taper off for no apparent reason. And she was wise enough in her experience to acknowledge that this symptoms could be related to some underlying medical condition. And the sad part is I don't know really what the mindset is or was of the people I worked with at the time, but once the diagnosis started to come in, once the things started to get all stacked up and the explanations started to come in, I don't know if it was like a reputation that I had developed for myself, that I tarnished my own image. I can only speculate what they were thinking about me, but it was really hard because they weren't supportive of me. And at the end of June, 1 week out from my diagnosis, I was let go from my job. I was put onto a PIP that this is a performance improvement plan that I thought was unfair. They disagreed and they let me go. And when I got that initial diagnosis, I mentioned that I was mad, and I was mad because of what it ultimately turned out to be. And I'm still, it still upsets me that there was this lingering question, burning question about what is causing my symptoms. And they knew that I was going to be getting this diagnosis, and they knew that I was suffering mentally, physically, and I didn't have the support from my employer at that point. So that was a really, really difficult time in my life, and I think it all plays back into trusting yourself, because I was gaslit constantly, and people would criticize me for things that were known symptoms of the conditions I had, and that primarily being anemia. And it was through supportive friends like you and my wife that constantly pushed me, reminded me of. I'm sorry, I get emotional, but I felt like a failure. I really felt like a failure. So it was really challenging for me. Of everything I went through, I think that was probably the most difficult. Was wondering, was my whole life a lie? I didn't know. The anemia was that powerful. It made me second guess myself constantly. And to have the gaslighting on top of it, I really went through this struggle in life that I couldn't explain. I thought some of you guys were crazy. Like, why do you believe in me? Why do you keep telling me this? Do you not know how big of a failure I am? It was really hard. Incredibly hard. I'm sorry.
So now that you've got the diagnosis, why don't you tell us about chemo and how it has affected you, and what it even really is and how it works.
Chemo is a thing that I don't know. I could go trying to put this into words for the rest of my life, and I hope that's a very long time, by the way, and still fail to ever really articulate it to the point that I think it deserves. It starts out relatively simple, and it starts to kind of build on itself over time. And part of it is the mental toll that it takes on you, but there are some absolutely real physical things that you can, like nausea. To be clear, I didn't have much hair at the start of all this, but one of the immunotherapy drugs that I was put on, the side effects is hair loss. But the chemo drugs, surprisingly, the ones that I've been prescribed don't really have that as a side effect. But the nausea and just general sense of dread, losing interest in things that are pleasurable, like eating, and it's really hard to put into words, because you start to get to this point where you set aside some of your basic needs, but then you kind of snap back into reality. This is my experience anyway, and realize, no, you have to eat. You can't not eat, but you feel so nauseous that like putting food into your stomach is like you don't even know if you can do it. But so it's hard. You need to sit down there. I've had a very supportive family. I love that my daughter has I've been very to a point. She's 3.5 years old, so I don't get into all the gory details or anything like that, but I've been very forward with her, and she sits to my left when we eat at the dinner table, and I always look over at her. She's like, "You got it, Daddy," and I love that encouragement. She's just been a great support system. She knows that I'm sick, and so even in my worst, she's been a really big cheerleader for me. And specifically back to the chemo, so I'm not derailing too far here. I think the mental aspect of it starts to become starts to accumulate over time as well. So the treatment plan that I'm on, so I have a port installed here, and the chemo and any other medications that they would be giving me during my treatment is all given to me through this port. And when they're done, I still have a needle into this port that has a catheter that feeds directly into my heart, as I understand it, and a tube that comes off, and they can use this tube to connect other things, like to collect blood, or in my case, when I leave, I get this yellow thing. It literally looks like a lemon. And they call it a pump, but it uses atmospheric pressure to pump a continuous stream, I think at 2 milliliters per hour. So it's a very slow dose of chemo through this pump, and I have to wear that for 46 hours. And I was mentioning the mental side of things, and I feel like that's really important, because I'm fine right now, but I've thought about this pump and just probably turn green, because it's such an uncomfortable feeling to have this thing attached to you. You get hung up in things, so it's awkward. I don't want to be out in public, because I said this like almost like tongue in cheek. I was kind of being silly, but then realized it actually applied to me. It's like I remember saying something, I don't want to look like a cancer patient, and then realized, wait a minute, I am a cancer patient, and it was a difficult thing. So yeah, I associate such negativity with this pump. It makes me feel sick, and I hate that aspect of it. I hate that I sit down in the chair after 2 weeks between, knowing that I'm finally starting to be on the upswing. I'm finally starting to feel better. And the very last time I sat down in that chair, I almost broke into tears because I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew that here we go again. And it's really hard to keep your motivation in those moments, because it's debilitating. And the chemo brain is real. You forming sentences on top of being anemic is difficult. The nausea, I've experienced symptoms of motion sickness, and I sit at a computer all day, and I have people trying to present things to me, and I'll stare at the screen and try my best to focus on it, only to all of a sudden have the room around me start spinning, and I have to get up and walk away. And there's been more than once where it happened so quickly that I was afraid I was going to throw up on my keyboard. I just had to take my headphones off, walk away, and not even tell anybody what I was going through. That said, it is manageable. You do eventually get to a point that you learn what to expect, and you can get through it. It sucks, but it's better than the alternative, and you kind of find a way to juggle it in some way, even though you're sick and everything seems like it's stacked up against you. Somehow, some way, you find a way to get through it.
Okay, so this next question that we have for you is, how has all of this affected your family?
That's a heavy question. So I've mentioned my daughter has been incredibly supportive, and I know that she doesn't quite grasp the magnitude of it, but she has been so supportive, and her silly cheerleading antics have brought so much joy to my life, and know that I have such a wonderful, beautiful daughter that can make me laugh when I'm feeling like absolute crap. So that, and I see my wife react to it, and I see the smile that it brings to her face, and so from that aspect of it, great. I love. I would never ever wish this on anybody, or including myself. But it's a beautiful thing, and I truly love that. Our son, he's as of today is a little over 14 months old, and he doesn't understand it at all. And he knows that his dad used to play with him, used to roughhouse with him, and he doesn't know that I can't do that. So he still tries to be the dad that he knew me to be, and he gets grabby at the port that I mentioned earlier, and it hurts really bad. So I've at times struggled with him because I don't know how to tell them that I'm still here, I still love you, I still want to play with you, I just can't do it. So that's been hard. My wife has been incredibly supportive. I before marriage, I remember thinking to myself that I kind of got in this loop in my head that I was focused on the words in sickness and in health, and it was almost foreshadowing the days that would come. And she has been not only a cheerleader in my corner, she has picked up where I hate. I really hate when I can't be an equal partner with her, in the sense that I can't put the kids down to bed at night sometimes because I'm too sick, I'm too weak. There's whatever the case is. I can't help with the laundry, I can't help with the dishes, and that really weighs on me because I grew up in a family that was shifted, where my mother did all the housework, and my father was the bread maker, and I never wanted that dynamic with my family. I wanted to be an equal, and everybody in the family do their part. And it kills me to see that my wife is picking up my slack because I want so badly to help her. I see the stress that it takes on her. There've been days that she gets frustrated because she doesn't have the escape and doesn't have the help that I know she needs, and she grits her teeth and just digs down and finds a way to make it work. But there's something else that really I I don't know how to put in how to phrase this, but it became abundantly clear to me that I was out walking with a friend in the mountains. We were doing this hike, and he had given me a lot of encouragement, and I suddenly reached this point that I saw, like, in my mind, that the bunch of cheerleaders, and they were all cheering me on, and I don't want that to stop. I am truly appreciative of everything everybody has done for me, and I really appreciate that support system that I have. But as we were talking, I pictured again, I get so emotional about these kinds of things. I try not to, but I pictured my wife just watching from the outside, like everybody cheering at me, and she was looking in, and I saw her as this outsider, and wait a minute, who's cheering for her? And yeah, like, just at the end of the day, she's picking up all of the slack that I would have otherwise been providing for our family. Keep in mind that there was the point in time where I wasn't working. Fortunately, I have gone back to work, and that was weighing on me. So at least that aspect of it has gone away. And then the ultimate fear is if I don't make it. She's the one that has to pick up the slack. She has to explain to her kids. And it's hard. And it made me really, really love my wife even more than I could have ever imagined. I want to help her, and it's funny being in the situation that I'm in. But that when anybody asks what they can do, that's really one of my first things is, what can you do to help her? And I maintain that even though this is a really challenging time, it has made me very, very thankful for everything that I have in my life, including a very, very supportive family.
So the next question is, how can people help? You kind of mentioned it, but why don't we get your perspectives on it?
Okay. I want to make sure I give I'm thinking about a lot of different things here, and I want to just make sure I give the answer that this question deserves. So, from my personal perspective, even though I have mentioned that I really want support from my wife, and I don't want to take away from that at all. From my personal perspective, when people come to visit and get me out of the house and get me to do things that I've been so down on energy, that the enthusiasm that I get from other people is something that I can't put into words. You're visiting from out of town. We had some friends in from out of town. We all got together, and I sent to the group, this was one of the greatest weekends I've had in a long time, and that I mean that because I've been struggling to get out of the house. It's really hard when I know that I can't be there for my wife when the kids start to act up, and I have at times turned into a bit of a hermit, and so I think, like, getting together with me and giving me that emotional support means a lot, and that kind of transitions into my next thing with regard to my wife. I didn't feel like I was burdening her at all this weekend. I knew that if I got tired, that I could turn to one of my friends, and they would gladly pick up the slack of holding Isaac when he walking through the trails, and that I could see a joy in my wife that I hadn't seen in a long time, because she, I think, also experienced that same camaraderie and just feeling that the willingness of people to help her out was there. And I saw her really engage with people and laugh in ways that I haven't seen her laugh in a long time. So really, the community is a big thing. Like having the support of friends and family to come out in your time of need, and even if you think you're burdening them, you're not. They're these are your friends and family. These are my friends and family, and I'm so supportive. I'm so grateful rather of their support. Now on the other side of this, looking at it from the perspective of everybody else, I realize now that I kind of had this preconceived notion of what it meant to be a cancer patient, and I think a lot of that probably stems from what I've seen in Hollywood, and I now sit with these folks in the treatment center, and the conversations I've had with these people are some of the most genuine and uplifting. I mean, they're like, you're talking to people that in some cases they're why am I blanking on the word? They have a terminal cancer, and they don't have much longer left to live, and they, to sound like a country song, they have found a way to find peace and enjoy what little time they have left, and they don't the joy that comes off of them is infectious. I love it. Of everything that I do, I hate the treatment center for the way it makes me feel in that sense, but the support from the nurses and the other people that are receiving treatment is second to none. It's like we are our own community. Another thing I want to say is the very first time I set foot into a treatment center, I was literally ashamed. I had this stigma that only people that have gone down dark paths and have this crazy history with whatever, that those are the people that get cancer. And I've now realized, yeah, even though some of them are the ones that I might be receiving treatment alongside, they are human, and we're all in this together. And I just feel this connection that I can speak to any of them, and I see when I'm speaking sometimes that they're smiling, and I kind of just take a glance at the room, thinking sometimes I'm sharing more than I perhaps should, but I see their smiles. I think I'm getting the same joy out of this as they are, and it makes me feel good. I feel part of a community that I would have never asked to be a part of, but now that I'm in it, they're not who I thought they were, not what Hollywood depicted. We're all the same. And it's an incredibly humbling experience.
So you've mentioned previously that you have a lot to be thankful for. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention on that front?
Boy, you asked some good questions today. There's something about all of this that puts into perspective the things that really truly matter, and I feel like everything that I'm going to say is going to come off as cliche, but it very quickly has a way of humbling you. And while I still hold a bit of I guess resentment, for lack of better words, towards the people that I used to work with, I've tried to find my peace, and I've really realized that work is truly a means to an end. And I now envy some of the people that are like overlanding. So the things that I'm really thankful for are really the times that I have with my friends and my family. The finances and everything, they are and it ends to a mean. I don't care about it in the same sense that I once did. I consider myself incredibly blessed that I had a wife that was able to put me on her insurance when I lost mine, and that we live in a society that is far advanced, far more advanced rather than when my grandfather was fighting cancer some 15 plus years ago. The medical advancements have come so far, and we've learned so much in these past few years. And I'm tremendously thankful for everybody on my medical team. I really feel like they have a truly difficult job to have to be the ones to give these diagnoses, and they really truly fight for you. I think that's it. I know the medical community can get a lot of bad rep, and I don't feel that way about my team. I'm incredibly thankful for them. Yeah, I've mentioned my family. It has made me, it's humbled me tremendously, and their support I can't thank them enough. All these things are so great, and I look around at the land around me, and just realize we have a beautiful world, and it makes me want to see it more, and get my head out of the computer. I spent so much of my life buried with my head down next to a monitor and a keyboard, and I love my job. I don't want to. I love the kind of work I do, but it's really made me think back about what are the things that really matter to me, and ultimately my job has been nothing more than a means to an end. And if I could, I'd leave it in a heartbeat, and I know most of us would, but you really don't understand the magnitude of that until you're faced with this possibility that you're not going to be around, and you think back about how much time that you could have spent doing other things instead of working. Take more vacations. Don't worry that you're going to spend money and you're not going to be making money. You're going to be using PTO, whatever all those excuses that we tell ourselves, but you can't do it because of X. You can find a way, and everybody can find a way to make it work. And it just really makes that abundantly clear to me that I should have been doing that more frequently at a much younger age.
So the last question I want to ask is, what do you have to say for everyone watching?
So I hadn't really thought about this at all, to be honest with you, but the first thing that came to mind is the fact that you have an audience of viewers that have no idea who I am, and yet they felt compelled to join you on this and to hear my story. And I've lived a pretty, I don't know what, I guess, quiet, secluded life, and I don't usually openly share with a whole lot of people, and the fact that anybody would be interested enough to hear my story is kind of a humbling experience that I didn't anticipate, to be perfectly honest with you. I just want to say thank you, and indirectly I feel like you're or even directly part of the support system that I didn't even realize you were. And that, I guess that just really means a lot to me. So yeah, it's really, thank you. And know that, this is obviously my story, but I'm sure there are a lot of other folks out there that are going through similar struggles, and don't be afraid, I guess, to talk about it with them, because they probably appreciate that you're reaching out to them, and and showing interest in what they're going through. If they don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But I think emotional support is underrated, and I hope others get the kind of support that I have. I'm one person among many that's battling this, and just they deserve the same amount of support as I have gotten. But really truly thank you, and I feel silly that I never realized that until this very moment.